Inshallah, see you next week.
We're on? Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم آمين وبعد. We continue with the Tafseer of Surah al-Baqarah. We're on ayah 229. We've started reading a section of ayat that speak on the rulings of marriage, and then the ayat, and then we got into the ayat that speak on some of the rulings of divorce. And we mentioned a few things about divorce. I don't really want to go back, but something that I will share is that the Prophet ﷺ has said, أبغض الحلال إلى الله or at-talaq, or kama qala alayhi salatu wassalam, that the most hated or the most disliked halal thing to Allah is divorce. And although this hadith's authenticity is debated, our scholars generally agree that divorce is something extremely frowned upon in deen. It is highly discouraged. We know there's another hadith that just kind of the gist of the hadith is that the shayateen, they report to Iblis. And every devil, every shaitan tells Iblis what he did. This man is like, I made this person commit haram, I made this person lie, I made this person cheat, I made this person, drink, I made this person not pray. And then, everybody, and then one of the devils, he says, I made this couple divorce. And he said, and then shaitan brings him close and he says, you have, you're the best one, right? And so to show that this divorce is something that is extremely frowned upon in Sharia. It is something disliked to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is a work of shaitan to create animosity between people and to create separation between spouses and break up families. And so here, but we know that also divorce is sometimes a necessary solution. Sometimes there's no alternative. And so it is a solution for many situations. And sometimes there's no escape. And that's actually maybe the best thing a person can do. He would advise them to divorce. In the case, a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ once, and her husband was a righteous man. But she said, I hate being, I hate to have kufr in Islam. I hate to be somebody who's disobedient and have acts that are not in line with the deen. And so she said, and so the Prophet ﷺ said, will you give him his dowry back? Will you give him his hadiqah, a garden that he had gifted her? She said, yes, Ya Rasulullah, I will give it back to him because I can no longer remain with him. So the Prophet ﷺ said, so he allowed her to do khula. She was able to return the dowry and separate herself from him. So sometimes divorce is a bitter solution. There's no alternative. So this is a general teaching of Sharia. It's not a good thing. We don't want it. But there are solutions where divorce might be the best solution for that scenario, for that family. On a more modern contemporary level, we know that divorce is at a higher rate than it has ever been in the past, or it is at some of its higher rates ever. Some of the highest rates ever we've seen of divorce is in our contemporary time. And so this is something social scientists study. They're like, what is leading to this kind of this excessive, abundant divorce in our modern time? Single parenthood, and so on and so forth. The other day, I hear a conversation from an elder, and they're like, you rarely find a young couple able to stay together, right? And then somebody was saying, no, this is just an issue in the U.S., and then the elder was like, no, this is everywhere. It's just around the world, you find that people's ability to live together and stay together is just decreasing. And so this is something that is, something of interest. I don't have an answer to say, well, these are the reasons, but there are some factors. And so some of these factors have to do with, first of all, people's ability to compromise and to deal with each other with good character. So the akhlaq of people has kind of dwindled. And so when a person's character, kind of dwindles and they're not kind, they're not compassionate, they're not fair, they're not reasonable, it makes it very difficult to live with that person. And so we see there is kind of a deterioration of akhlaq on a global level. We see that, right? There's morally, what the world is today morally is very different than what it was 20 years ago, what it was 50 years ago. Family values have changed. Mental health and the rise of depression, anxiety, the rise of anger, impulsive behaviors have increased significantly. So when these things are going so high and people are now very less able to cope with stress, then what does that create? That creates more conflict and more fighting and so on and so forth. And so that's definitely a contributing factor. Another contributing factor I believe, or that I kind of perceive from my own experience as a counselor, is that people's tolerance has also decreased. And so the previous generation, a lot of our elders, they always talk about we've learned to tolerate some of the flaws of our spouses and just kind of overlook it for the well-being of the family. And we've lived with that. With this younger generation, that tolerance is not the same. It is decreased. And so people are less tolerant towards conflict, less tolerant towards disagreement, less able to handle conflict. And so that has also led to an increase in divorce. And there are other factors. And so I don't have a solution, but this is really just a global crisis, a crisis in our Muslim community. And it's something that we really need to create a solution for. What are some solutions? Part of the solutions is, people raising mature men and women in our homes as parents. It starts with parenting. We have to raise our own children to be responsible, kind, fair people. If we cannot raise good children in our own homes, if I can't raise my children to be reasonable, fair, considerate, polite, hardworking, and I'll instill these qualities in them as a parent, and the other person doesn't, and the other person doesn't, and we're raising our kids like this, what's going to happen to our community? There's going to be a lot of conflict, a lot of issues. And so it really starts with, home. Also, it starts with, especially with the men, a lot of times, based on what I've witnessed from experience, this isn't all across the board, a lot of time, but oftentimes men are not fulfilling their obligations and they're not honoring their responsibilities. Not all the time. A lot of times it's women too, and I've had many cases like that. But I found it more often with men than I do find it with women. That oftentimes men are not honoring their responsibilities, they're unfair, they're inconsiderate of the woman's circumstance. They'll want her to work, raise 5 kids, do everything, and for him, he's like, I'm just going to provide, and that's it. And so sometimes there's a lot of inconsideration on the men's part, and sometimes very dismissive, and that has happened a lot. And so, these issues really need to be addressed. Another solution for this is, and actually before I go to the second one, the reason I see with men, we find with our younger generation, our daughters, the young women in our community, are having a harder time finding suitable husbands than the young men are finding suitable wives. And this is across the board, even like in non-Muslim communities, the same thing. Women mature faster psychologically and are more focused. Men have a hard time focusing and restraining themselves more than women. And so therefore, for example, if you look at the number of students in college, the number of women attending college is significantly higher than the number of young men attending college, right? The number of men committing crime is significantly higher than the number of young women committing crime, right? And so the number of men fall into addiction is significantly higher than the number of women fall into addiction. So we have this modern world has created a world of many tribulations, many temptations, many traps, and young men are having a hard time resisting these issues than young women are. And so what has that created? It's created a community where you have large number of women who are qualified to get married and ready to get married, but then you don't have the same number of young men able to get married. And so there's that, and then a lot of them do get involved in relationships, but then that's where it brings the issue of like young men not being mature enough to carry the responsibilities of a family, then they end up failing their responsibilities. So these are just some contemporary issues to think about that, as a community, as a society, we need to solve. I definitely encourage counseling and marriage counseling and support outside of the couple. There are professionally trained counselors to intervene and help couples resolve their issues. And this is something I think we have to really start normalizing in our community. Rather than dealing with years and years of conflict and then eventually end up with a divorce, you'd rather tell them, hey, go get help, right? Solve your issues while they're still early in your marriage before it gets, too late and the problems get too big and you're not able to, tolerate them anymore. So this is something that also I think is an important solution to that we need to really promote and encourage in the community, is encouraging, just couples who are struggling to find a healthy balance in their marriage to really just get professional support and to deal with their conflict. And so those are just some, again, introductions, some modern contemporary issues. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll dive into these ayat. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says after أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الطلاق مرتان فإمساك بمعروف أو تسريح بإحسان ولا يحل لكم أن تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا إلا أن يخافا ألا يقيما حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيما حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به تلك حدود الله فلا تعتدوها ومن يتعد حدود الله فأولئك هم الظالمون. So the ayah begins, الطلاق مرتان. Divorce is twice, right? And so الطلاق مرتان, divorce is twice. What does that mean? Divorce is twice. I think this is common knowledge. A man can take his wife back after divorce the first 2 times. But the third one, he can't take her back. So here the ayah says divorce is twice. We usually say divorce is 3 times. The ayah says twice because the 2 times you can retract. You can resume the contract. The third divorce, you cannot retract, you cannot resume the contract. The divorce is permanent. And we'll talk about how do we reset the count, inshallah ta'ala. Let me see. Yeah, in the following ayah. So divorce is twice. So what does it mean that a man can take his wife back? If a man issues a word of divorce, and in Islam, the man is the one who issues the word of divorce. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made him the caretaker and leader of the home, and one of the authorities that the man has over the woman is that he has been given the authority to issue the divorce. Does that mean that women cannot seek divorce? No. she can seek a divorce through the courts. And so she has the option of doing khula'. It's not called talaq. So we have talaq, which is issued by the man. A woman can seek divorce through the courts. And what is her divorce? She asks for a divorce, and the judge tells the man, this woman has requested divorce, you can divorce her of your own will. The man can say no. Then she can say, I will give him his mahar back on condition that he gives me my divorce. That's called a khula'. The third option also is fasakh. What is fasakh? Fasakh is to cancel the contract by the judge. The judge sees, the court sees, that this man is unable to fulfill his responsibilities, or he's not willing to fulfill his responsibilities. So the man, for example, cannot provide for his family. The man, for example, has an addiction. He's alcoholic or something of that sort. He has an addiction, he's not responsible. Physically abusive, something of the sort, where there's harm to the family, to his wife. The judge can say, since this man is not fit to be married, I have fasaktu nikah. I have cancelled the entire nikah. I have removed this marriage contract. They are no longer married to each other. And by that, the nikah is automatically cancelled by the judge, and they're separated. The man doesn't have to do anything. So a woman can seek these alternatives. But the word of talaq, only the man can issue it. Initiated from himself, but she also has ways. We said here in non-Muslim societies, the imam and community leaders in institutions hold the position of the courts. So it is the responsibility of the leaders of the community, the masajid, the Islamic centers, the imams, community elders and leaders, scholars, to create services where people, women and men, can come to the masjid and be like, I have this issue, I need intervention. The imam would call, there would be somebody appointed to call the husband. Show up, you have 2-3 weeks to respond to this request. If he responds, great. If he doesn't respond, he's given a second request. He doesn't respond after the third request, the imam can cancel the nikah, after giving him a number of chances. Like the masjid, the institution, takes the place of a court, of a qadi in Islamic law. So that is what we need to. These services are something that are extremely lacking in our Muslim communities in non-Muslim societies, and so these are services that we really need to establish and invest in and structure. So that's speaking about divorce and some of the ways divorce can happen. So we said 3 options. You have talaq, you have khula', you have fasakh. Talaq is issued by the man. Khula' is initiated by the woman because she's offering him a return of his mahar for divorce. So that's initiated by the woman. And the fasakh is initiated by the court. She makes a request, but the judge is the one who executes that divorce. And so these are 3 terminologies. And so at-talaqu marratan, divorce is twice. This is referring to divorce that is issued only by the man. We're not referring to the khula'. We're not referring to the fasakh. We're referring to the divorce that is issued by the man. If a man issues a word of divorce, he can resume the contract within the iddah. The iddah, we said, is 3 menstrual cycles, right? Or 3 states of purity, depending on what school we take. Roughly 3 months. And so within that time frame, the man can say, raja'tuki. He can say, I will take you back as my wife, and the marriage is resumed. A fiqhi issue that comes up between oftentimes is intimacy during the iddah. Does it resume the marriage? So let's say a couple, the woman is on her iddah, but during the iddah they're intimate. They have sexual intercourse during the iddah. Does that mean that he has taken her back? This has happened. This often happens. I had recently a case like that, and so the majority of our scholars say no. The raj'ah, the word of taking back, is called raj'ah. That has to be verbal. It has to be said. I believe in the Maliki school, they say intercourse takes the place of raj'ah. Even if the action happens, it takes the place of raj'ah. But the majority of our scholars say no. The divorce happens by a statement, and the raj'ah must happen by a statement. It cannot happen by simple action. We have to ask, did he say it? Was that his intention? Because the action, he might have the intention to take her back or not. It might just be a desire of the moment or not. We don't know. So that's why it's not clear if they're intimate. Is that him taking her back and resuming the marriage or not? We don't know. So that's why the court is the requirement by the majority of our fuqaha is the raj'a must happen verbally. And so to that couple, that's what I advise them. I said the action is one, but the raj'a must happen verbally. Simply being intimate with your spouse does not suffice. Another mas'ala, and I'll suffice with this inshallah ta'ala, last mas'ala. Mas'ala are like fiqhi rulings. So another mas'ala is, what if a man divorces his wife 3 times in one moment? So this is now issuing 3 divorces in one moment. There are 2 possibilities. The first possibility is he intends to repeat himself as an emphasis. He emphasizes. He's not intending number, he's intending emphasis. You're divorced, you're divorced, you're divorced, for example. It's not, he's trying to say 3 divorces, but it's a form of what? Emphasizing. I'm repeating myself to emphasize my message. That's one. So that one, our scholars, generally we can say, or the predominant opinion is that it's only 1 divorce. Why? Because it was an emphasis. Is that? Others will say no. He said 3 divorces, 3 divorces. Even if his intention was emphasis. Why? Because the words of divorce came out 3 times, it's 3 divorces. So that's debated. But that one, there's a stronger khilaf between the scholars. The second one, the khilaf is really like very minimum. This one is he makes 3 divorces with the intention of 3 divorces in one sitting. I divorce you 3 times. Or he says, you are divorced, you are divorced, you are divorced. Each one intending a separate divorce. He's so angry, he's like, I never want to be with you again. I don't even want to have the idea or the option of ever resuming this marriage. So for that reason, I'm going to give you your 3 right now. And this is something that has become culturally normal in many societies. I'll give you your 3 right now. I gave her 3. People do this, sadly. And we know that decisions we make at the time of anger, we oftentimes regret them. They're not smart decisions, right? But people say this. So what is the fiqhi ruling? The majority of our scholars say if he makes the statement of 3, it's 3. This is all the 4 madhabs. Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali. If he says, I divorced you 3 times, you are divorced 3 times. Or he says, you are divorced, you are divorced, you are divorced. And he intends 3 divorces like that, she's divorced 3 times, he cannot take her back. That is the 4 schools, opinion of the 4 schools. A minority of opinion, revived by Ibn Taymiyyah. It was held in the early time of the Sahaba, but afterward the scholars agreed. 3 divorces, 3. That was the general opinion of the entire ummah. Ibn Taymiyyah, he brought back this old opinion that used to exist. He said, no, 3 divorces at one sitting only counts as 1. And that's an opinion that many contemporary scholars have taken. So, I don't personally follow that, because if you said it, you said it. You intended it, you intended it. You're responsible for what you say, right? That's part of being an adult. If you say, I divorced you 3 times, and you said 3 times, I've given you 3 talaq, there's no way you can, I can say that's only 1. And that's what the majority of our scholars, they took that opinion, that if you say 3 explicitly, it's 3, there's no going around that. Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayhi, which he has precedence. I'm not saying that this is just his opinion. There is precedence for it, but it's a very minority opinion. His opinion is 3 divorces in one sitting only count as 1. It does not count as 3, and he can still take her back, even if he explicitly said 3 divorces. Wallahu a'lam. So that's another mas'ala. But this one, like I said, the khilaf is very minimum. With the other one, where he says 3, but he intends 1. Does that make sense? The other one, he says 3, but he is intending 1. He repeated himself as a way of emphasis. That one, there's a stronger debate, because they're saying he didn't explicitly say 3. And when he repeated himself, he wasn't trying to say 3, he was just trying to emphasize the point. So with that one, there's a greater dispute and a greater argument. I'm not saying which one, but the general lesson is what? A responsible man does not take the word of divorce lightly. If a man is playing with the divorce, he has not matured. Right? Like you're being emotional, you're acting emotional, that Allah gave you the authority to make the decision because you're supposed to be the less emotional of the partner in the marriage. But if the husband is becoming the overly emotional person and overreacting and exaggerating in statements, he's shown that he has a lot of growing to do. He still has he's not fully matured yet. We have to teach him, brother, you have to be more mature than this. I expect better from you. Right? And so the man in the marriage has to be the one to keep his cool, keep his emotions down. Don't let his ego get out the way. Even if his wife is provoking him, he has to think with wisdom rather than think with emotion. Right? So that is, some practical advice. But these are some ahkam. These are some ahkam that, connect to these ayat, inshallah ta'ala. The brother had a question.
I was just saying, does it have to be speech or does writing count as speech?
Writing takes the place of speech as well. Yeah. So writing is the same as speech. It's actually considered, if I'm not mistaken, it's considered superior than speech. Because writing is documented. It can be tracked. Whereas speech, you need witnesses. Maybe somebody could deny it, right? But writing, you can't forget writing. It's there, right? If somebody would say, well, I never said it, I forgot. And sometimes that happens. A man says, a woman says, he divorced me, I heard him. The man's like, I don't think I ever said it. No, I didn't divorce him. And then you have an issue now. And the woman's like, no, I'm not his wife, he divorced me. He's like, what do you do now? Do you take her statement? Do you take his statement? It's a whole case in fiqh, I don't want to get into all that right now. But generally, writing is actually more secure because it's recorded, it's documented, you can go back to it. Wallahu alam.
I have a question. So, how can you divorce her 3 times if you only married her once?
So the brother asks, this is a counter argument that those who say you can't divorce 3 times and once. Divorcing 3 times when you married her once doesn't mean you're divorced. It's not the same. So marriage can only be done once, right? You marry somebody once. Divorce, Allah has given you 3 times. The ayah is giving us that. At-talaqu marratan. It's giving men, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us a chance to reconcile families so that it doesn't break up. Imagine every family had to separate as soon as one divorce is issued. How many couples are together for decades? They had a divorce maybe once in the first few years of their marriage. It happens. But then subhanAllah, they go back together, they reconcile, and then they stay married for many decades afterwards. So it's a rahmah from Allah Ta'ala. When He says, at-talaqu marratan, it's a rahmah. Allah Ta'ala is giving us the chance, hey, maybe you had khilafat, you had a divorce, but you saw that divorce didn't make your life better. It just made it worse. So now you're like, okay, no, that wasn't a great option. Let's go back. And so you go back and now you're like, okay, I think I'm going to do better this time. So Allah Ta'ala is giving us chances to repair our marriages before destroying them. Does that make sense? So that's why number-wise it's not the same, because with talaq, Allah is giving us opportunities to repair our marriages. Another thing I'll add is that the Arab used to also abuse women with raj'ah. How did they abuse the women? They would divorce her, wait for her iddah to nearly end, and take her back. Just to keep her, so that she can't remarry. But then there was no limit. You could do this 2 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times. There was no limit. So a man would divorce his wife, take her back at the end of her iddah. 3 months later or so, he'll take her back. He'll do it again. Divorce her, take her back again. Half a year has passed and this woman is not his wife, nor is she divorced, nor is she single. 3rd time, do it again. 4th time, a year has passed. She's not married, but she's not single. She can't move on. And they would keep the women in this kind of limbo where they're not married and they're not single. They can't remarry, but they're not also married to their husbands. It was an abuse of power. And so Sharia came and protected the women. But then Sharia didn't just come and say once only, because then that would be very strict. And that would also lead to a lot of harm in marriages. So Allah Ta'ala gave us a balance. While protecting the rights of women, but also giving families the opportunity to resolve their khilafat. Does that make sense? So that's where the 3 times comes from, is a way to help the families repair the issues before it's permanent and there's no return. You had a follow-up question to that?
So if a man is married to a woman and he divorces her once the first time, and then maybe a week or 2 later he says, I divorce you again, like he says talaq.
Yeah.
And he says it again, talaq. So those count as those 3 times.
Exactly.
The woman is then haram for him, regardless of the situation.
He can't take her back. After the 3rd, he cannot take her back. He cannot take her back at all.
What are the conditions for him to return to the woman if he just divorced himself from her once or twice? Are there any conditions for him to come back?
So the brother asks, what are the conditions for raj'ah? Yeah. If a man wants to take his wife back, what are the conditions? Do you need witnesses? Do you need to write it? You don't need all that. It's recommended. It's better to have 2 witnesses to confirm that you said that. Right? It's good to have the family involved. We've resolved our issue. I take my wife back. It's a good gesture. But it isn't required. If a man says, I simply take you back, raja'tuki, sometimes, it's just between the couples, and he could say raja'tuki, and that's sufficient. Right? So there's no requirement. Like, with marriage, you need 2 witnesses, you need wali, you need, this, that, qabul. With divorce, you don't need any of those requirements. You don't need witnesses, you don't need her father, you don't need her family, you don't need to have it written, there doesn't have to be a word of acceptance or initiation, none of that. He simply says, divorce is divorce. He simply says, I take you back, I take you back. Now, do we recommend? We recommend documentation, so that we don't have khilaf. Somebody says, he divorced me twice. He divorced me 3 times. Or somebody says, he intended 3, no, I only intended 1. Oh, he did say it. No, I didn't say. You see what I'm saying? So when you have witnesses, there's less likely to be this khilafat. This, recollection of memory will be more accurate. So that's why it's better to have witnesses and to have it documented. But it's not required. I'll take 2 more questions and then we want to move on, inshallah. Brother Adnan, did you have a question?
This is off topic, but we can talk about it later. I've noticed in the deen, there's a lot of emphasis on the number 3. Wudu, when you're in ruku or sujood. It'd be nice to talk about what is the number 3, and even in the Quran, there's things mentioned thrice.
Right.
I know about Sabah. I know 7 has a significance.
Right.
But what about? I never understood about 3.
So
talk about it later.
Yeah. So the brother asked, maybe a topic for the future, inshallah, is about the number 3, and I can add to that also the odd numbers. So what is the relevance of 3, and 3 is an odd number. We know there's also a preference for 7, and there's also 1. So why is there this preference for odd numbers in Sharia? What do these odd numbers symbolize? What does 3 symbolize? What does 1 symbolize? What does 7 symbolize? And so inshallah, that's the topic we can maybe keep for our Q&As, inshallah ta'ala. Brother Karana?
Yeah, so how about a person he drug alcohol, right?
Yeah.
Then he just divorce, so does it count or not?
Yes, so Brother Karana is asking about divorce in a state of intoxication. Is divorce in a state of intoxication valid or not? This is again an issue that is khilaf. Personally, the position of the Shafi'i school, from what I remember, this is years ago, maybe a decade ago I read this, is that that because he committed a crime by drinking, issuing a divorce during his intoxication, he's responsible for it. Because his intoxication is not excused. Does that make sense? His intoxication is not excused because he committed a crime by doing that, so any consequence of that is also not excused. Does that make sense? That is the Shafi'i position, if I recollect correctly. There is a position, I don't know what school, and I would have to revise this, that because if he's like extremely intoxicated to the point that he's really unaware of his decisions and his words, then he's not accountable, and that divorce doesn't count. So that's the issue of debate. And how do we resolve these issues? They go to the imam. The imam judges. Whatever fatwa he gives, they act according to it. Whenever there's these masail of khilaf, Go get a fatwa, whatever the imam gives, you follow the fatwa and that's it. Your job is to find an imam whose knowledge, expertise, and wisdom whom you trust. And then you act according to the fatwa that he issues. I don't advise fatwa shopping, one imam to another, until you get something that pleases you. That's not something, Islamic. Because at that point we made Islam into window shopping. Oh, I don't like this fatwa. Okay, khalas. Next imam. I don't like this imam fatwa. He's too extreme. Next imam. This imam, I don't like the way he's next imam. Right? So it becomes a joke. We make Islam into joke. Right? And so in the beginning, find an imam whose knowledge, whose wisdom, whose expertise you trust, and then refer your case to him. Then you act on the fatwa that you have been given, be it in your favor or against your favor, be it you liked or you don't like. You trusted this person, now you act according to the fatwa that you've been given. Unless you find out they're really unqualified or something of that sort, then at that point you can get to seek another imam. Wallahu a'lam. Alright, so we got into a lot of masail about divorce, which is fine, inshallah ta'ala. The rest of the ayah should be a bit short. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِمْسَاكُمْ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ تَسْرِيحٌ بِإِحْسَانٍ. What does فَإِمْسَاكُمْ بِمَعْرُوفٍ mean? Imsak بِمَعْرُوف means retention. Imsak means to retain. Right? When you're fasting, what do we call the person who's fasting? Imsak, right? That's the time of imsak, the time you refrain from eating. So فَإِمْسَاكٌ بِمَعْرُوفٍ is like you retain your wife, you keep your marriage. Is that clear? فَإِمْسَاكٌ, you keep your marriage, you retain your marriage. بِمَعْرُوفٍ. بِمَعْرُوفٍ, what did we say ma'ruf was last time? What were some of the translations we got? Equitably, in goodness, right? That is ma'ruf. So ma'ruf is you keep your wife with goodness, in goodness. If you're going to take the raja'ah, don't take, as the Arab, they would do the raja'ah pre-Islam. Why? To harm her. Or I'm not going to let you marry on, so I'm going to divorce you but take you back so I can divorce you again. Do you see what I'm saying? Or other men, in Muslims, oftentimes what happens, they take her back, but they don't want to deal with her with kindness. And then you tell the brother, Akhi, if you're not going to, respect her, take care of her, be responsible, let her be. He's like, no, nobody can tell me what to do with my wife. Right? We find that very often, even in Muslim societies, in Muslim communities, very, very often this happens. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says there should only be two cases. If you're going to keep your marriage, stay married to a woman, you keep her with ma'ruf, in goodness. If you cannot keep her in goodness, أو تسريح بإحسان. Tasrih is to let go. Or let her go with ihsan. Be kind, be of good akhlaq, be respectful. She was your wife, you took her from her family. Khalas, you don't want to be with her, you have an issue with her, you don't want to be together. Leave her and return her and give her a divorce with ihsan, with excellence. SubhanAllah, oftentimes people when they divorce, they become enemies, bitter enemies. Right? And the ayah is saying, no. Just like you married her with a decision that you made with respect of her family and her and everybody else from the community, if you're done and you can't live with her anymore, leave her be with respect, with ihsan. You don't have to keep her, but just to, create harm and fitna and so on and so forth. So, فَإِمْسَاكٌ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ تَسْرِيحٌ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Marriage should be one of two. You live in goodness or you separate with respect. If you live with hatred and fitna, that marriage is not khair for you. If you marry her just to harm her and ruin her life, that marriage is not good for you. It's a curse against you. It will be hujjah against you yawm al-qiyamah. So either because why? You're going to oppress each other, right? She's going to oppress you, you're going to oppress her, this, that, everybody has a sin, and you're going to yell at each other, raise your voices at each other, speak ill to each other, things, more fitna, more sins, until yawm al-qiyamah you come and you have all this hisab for all this mistreatment that a person committed. So a person, when they stay in their marriage, they should be one of two. Stay with respect and goodness, or separate with ihsan, with excellence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ أَن تَأْخُذُوا مِمَّا آتَيْتُمُوهُنَّ شَيْئًا. And it is not permissible, وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ. It is not halal for you. وَلَا يَحِلُّ يَحِلُّ means it's not halal. وَلَا يَحِلُّ لَكُمْ أَن تَأْخُذُوا that you take. That you take مِمَّا آتَيْتُمُوهُنَّ from what you have given them. مِمَّا آتَيْتُمُوهُنَّ شَيْئًا any of what you have given them. And this refers to the dowry, the mahar. A man cannot take back his mahar, his dowry from his wife once he gives her divorce. And this is a divorce after which that has been consummated. Meaning that he married her, a marriage has been consummated. They married, they slept together, and then divorce. Even if it was just once. Once the marriage is consummated, a man cannot reclaim any of his dowry in the case of that divorce. Subhanallah, something that we really a contemporary issue today is we know that at least in the United States over generally, that when a couple divorce, when a couple are married, they share all financial responsibilities, right? Debts and benefits, right? And the only way you protect yourself against that is having a prenup, and with a legally official prenup, legally recognized prenup. Islamically, Muslims, we recommend this. Imams, Islamically, it is Islamic to have a prenup. It is Islamic to have a prenup. I want to read the ayah, but this is an important issue. The reason it's important to have a prenup regarding the custody of children, also regarding wealth, because oftentimes when there's no prenup, the spouses do great harm to each other and great injustice. I know a brother, these stories are again and again and again. There's so many, not just one or two or three. People who've lost their homes, they've lost their retirement savings, their 401k, because of a divorce, right? And that is a great injustice, because Islamically, the man's 401k is his earning. A woman's 401k is her earning. A woman's savings is her earning. A man's savings is his earning. A man's debt is his burden. A woman's debt is her burden. But when a divorce happens, it's all split between them. 50-50. You can't have it. No, you can't. And this is un-Islamic. It's a great dhulm. Imagine he has $250,000 in debt because of school. And this woman, she has no debt from school. Now she has to carry the burden of his school debt. Or vice versa. She has $100,000, $200,000 of school debt, school loans. Now he has to carry that burden. He committed a crime. He's legally reliable for a damage, some accident, something, whatever. Now she's also liable, and she's going to be sued along with him because of that financial liability. Or opposite, vice versa. And Islamically, the wealth of a man and the wealth of a woman, the financial burdens of a man and the financial burdens of a woman are separate. And so that is why Islamically, we advise people who get married, have a prenup. Consult a Muslim lawyer, and oftentimes, wives, oftentimes, and it can be a man if a woman is has high earning income. They might be like, well, you don't trust me. It's not an issue of trust. This is a matter of protection for both of us. It's protection for you and me, right? Both man and wife. Because if the man has penalties and debts and lawsuits, she doesn't have to carry it. If she has these issues, he doesn't have to carry it. Does that make sense? So it's a protection for both parties, and it also avoids any conflict that might happen at the time of divorce. So in Western societies, we recommend that. Sharia, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prohibits that a man takes anything from the dowry during a divorce. And then the ayah continues, إِلَّا أَن يَخَافَ أَلَّا يُقِيمَا حُدُودَ اللَّهِ إِلَّا أَن يَخَافَ, the translation is, if the husband and wife both fear that they're not able to establish the limits of Allah. إِلَّا أَن يَخَافَ أَلَّا يُقِيمَا حُدُودَ اللَّهِ سبحانه شيئا إلا أن يخاف ألا يقيم حدود الله فإن خفتم ألا يقيم حدود الله فلا جناح عليهما فيما افتدت به. 379. I want to read the commentary here. He says, it does not behove the husband to take the dowry, which they have given away against the divorce. It is, however, permissible in the condition when they are at variance and reconciliation is not possible, and they fear that under such hostile atmosphere that they would not be able to obey divine injunctions in their family life. And secondly, when the husband might not have failed in the fulfillment of his obligations. Otherwise, to take back anything in return against divorce is totally unlawful. So here the ayah permits that a man can take back the divorce in the case of khula. That's, I'll just conclude with that, inshallah ta'ala. That if a man, in the case of khula, he can take back his dowry. That's what I wanted to say. He can take back his dowry in the case of khula, and that is when a woman wants to return her dowry with the condition that a man gives her divorce. Tilka hududullah, these are the limits of Allah. These are the boundaries of Allah. فَلَا تَعْتَدُوهَا, do not transgress them. وَمَن يَتَعَدَّ حُدُودَ اللَّهِ, and whoever transgresses the limits of Allah, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ, indeed they are the evildoers. فَأُولَٰئِكَ, they are the evildoers. هُمُ الظَّالِمُونَ. And subhanAllah, the ayah, the conclusion of the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls the Muslimin to be mindful of His laws in divorce. And this is really important. Why? We said when people divorce, divorces end really bitter. Right? Oftentimes when people divorce, they become enemies. They want to hurt each other. It's not like we're separating and we're just not, no, we hate, like there's hatred. Right? There's hatred and there's the desire to harm each other, even if a person is the parent of their children. And they still are blinded by their rage to the fact that they want to destroy this person's life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warns us, Tilka hududullah. These are the limits of Allah in divorce. Fear Allah in divorce. Fear Allah in divorce. Do not transgress them. Whoever transgresses the limits of Allah, they are oppressors. And the Prophet ﷺ says that dhulm, dhulumat yawm al-qiyamah. Oppression is darkness on the Day of Judgment. Oppression is darkness on the Day of Judgment. And so a person would rather leave the dunya safe without any crime against them, rather than have committed injustice and have to answer it before Allah Ta'ala in the courts of Yawm al-Qiyamah. Right? So this is a reminder, and subhanAllah, how often we see, it's ridiculous. People giving up, losing their homes, losing their retirement funds, losing their savings, giving up a significant portion of their earnings, beyond if there's children, beyond what the children need. Right? You can take care of a child, okay, maybe their expenses is a few $1,000s. Taking 20%, 15%, based on what the court rules, $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 a month for child support. And this is unjust. This is oppression. This is oppression. It is impermissible. It is haram. Even if every court in the world said you could do it. It is oppression. It is not your earnings. You cannot take the earnings of another person. Yes, you're taking it for the child. What does the child need? What are the needs of the child? Education, housing, clothing, medicine, right? Whatever the kid needs, let's give it a value. In this society, what is the cost of the living of a child, their education, even private school? You can add all of that together, the housing, add all that. Okay, we got a professional, estimate of this is the expenses of a child. You give, that's what the person is entitled to. But to take all this additional money and use it for personal benefit, that is impermissible and haram. And any wealth that is consumed under the title of child support must be spent on the child. Remember what we said about the wealth of orphans? You cannot spend the wealth of orphans on your personal self. Allah warns us. Same thing with child support. If a parent takes child support from the other parent, it is haram for them to spend the child support money on personal costs. It must be spent on the needs and expenses of the child. A portion of that can go to rent. A portion of that can go to utilities. A portion of that can go to grocery shopping, right? Groceries. But you cannot just use, child got 5,000, 10,000 child support. The kid only needs a couple thousand or whatever, 1,500. I'm going to pocket the rest. That is haram and impermissible. The rest of that wealth must be returned back to the owner. And if they refuse, then at least save it for the kid's future. Save it in a savings, use it for their college tuition, use it for them to start a family, to buy a house, whatever, invest it for the kid, but you cannot spend it on your own personal interests and needs. It is impermissible. So here there's a stern warning. Tilka hududullah. These are the limits of Allah. Do not transgress them. Do not pass them. And whoever does has indeed become an oppressor with Allah, and they have to answer to Allah in the course of Yawm al-Qiyamah. We would like to read more, but I know there's a lot of ahkam in these ayat. So we'll conclude for the night with just ayah 229. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll resume with 2:30 on Wednesday night, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our homes. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our marriages, to bless our spouses, to guide us to the best of character. We ask Allah to guide and to grant us righteous descendants, to establish our houses with iman and upon righteousness. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remove from our homes any dispute and animosity among us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant our community guidance and blessings. We ask Allah to guide our young men and women and to facilitate marriage for our bachelors and bachelorettes. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide our youth and raise them as young, intelligent, mature, righteous people. We ask Allah to forgive the believing men and women, to forgive us, our parents, our teachers, and all of the Muslimin. Allahumma ameen wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.